Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 34 of my 2021 reads. This week I finally read a couple of things that fit my August monthly priority. Not on my TBR, but at least they fit the priority. But I'm also in a bit of a reading slump, so there were some pauses and some DNFs. Also, I wanted to do a little mini update at the end of this video, just talking about my reading slump and kind of what I want to do for the next month or so. First, I finished Son of the Storm by Suyi Davies Okunbowa. This is the first book in a new epic fantasy series that's sort of African inspired, and it has got some really amazing world building and great political themes. This is a world where we follow a couple of characters that live in a very large city in a very powerful country. And this is a country state that is very isolationist and very full of itself. It thinks that its people are the best people ever and everybody else is just barbaric. There's also, in addition to that sort of isolationism, there's a lot of classism and a lot of racism, especially related to skin color. So the people of the city are very dark-skinned, and anybody lighter-skinned is considered inferior. A lot of immigrants come to the city looking for opportunity, and they're very heavily discriminated against. And we follow a boy who is of mixed race, but he ends up going to the top university because he has sort of a photographic memory. He can remember everything, and he does really well in terms of trying to tell their histories because he can remember everything so well. So we follow him as well as a couple of other people when something happens and an intruder from a faraway land comes and upsets everything about this system. So the person who comes is albino, and she has some magic that she brings along with her. And so this really upsets the order of things. And there's a lot of political maneuvering and a lot of questioning of what you know to be true. Really great political themes in this. I absolutely loved that. I think the world building is incredibly interesting as well. There's so much about this magic system that I think is very fascinating, especially in terms of the way that it demands a cost for its use. This is just such a fun, epic series. I do think that there's a couple of sort of weaker areas in the story. Things like sometimes it gets a little bit tropey, sometimes it has a little bit of info dumping, sometimes, especially towards the end, it gets a little bit violent. And there's a couple of aspects of sort of one of the main villain characters that I'm not 100% on board with, but even so, I thought that this was such a great new epic fantasy series. So if you're a fan of that kind of story, definitely I think you should pick this up. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I will for sure continue with this series as soon as the next book is out. Next, I read Alien Stories by E.C. Osondu. This is a short story collection that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing, who I will link below. And Sush, my husband, read this out loud to me. We had a fun time with these stories. So basically, the premise of this collection is that these are alien stories, where alien means both, somebody not of this world, as well as talking about immigrants. And because the author is Nigerian who has immigrated to America, a lot of this is talking about that immigrant experience of Nigerians who come to the US. So these stories were so interesting and so well written. A lot of these stories actually reminded me pretty heavily of the writing style of Oscar Wilde, where there's a lot of sort of biting satire, and sometimes the surface of the story seems a little bit frivolous, but underneath it is actually some pretty dark commentary on human nature. So these stories are very short, lots of very short stories in this that often take a very simple premise, many times having this sort of science fiction element, especially talking about aliens, but really that's used in a very literary way to talk about the experience of immigrants and the othering that happens to them to such a degree that people see them almost as not even human at that point. Really great social commentary in this, very good writing. A lot of these stories packed a great punch. One of the interesting things too about the way that Osondu writes is that these stories often just end. Like, you're used to stories which in some way will offer a conclusion or tell you what they're about, and many of these stories don't. They just sort of stop. And there were so many times where Sosha was reading this out loud to me and I'd go, wait, is that the end? And it was the end. And I think that it's a really interesting approach that Asondu takes, where it's sort of bringing up a problem but not answering it for you, not telling you a solution, not telling a way to process it or think about it. And I think that's a really interesting writing style. So I think this collection was quite fascinating, and really I loved the themes, talking about the immigrant experience and everything like that. But they are rather dark in terms of the commentary on human nature, not necessarily in the content. Most of these stories had fine content. It wasn't heavy or anything like that, but just the commentary on society was rather pessimistic. I gave this collection 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who likes short stories, anything to do with the immigrant experience, or any sort of more literary type of science fiction. I think this is a really cool collection. Next, I read Some Days by Maria Wernicke, translated by Lawrence Schimmel. This is a picture book that I heard about from Christina at Bookworm Dreams, who I will link below. And the author is Argentinian, so it is translated from Spanish. This is such a cool picture book. I loved the illustration style. It's somehow very simple and yet very impactful at the same time. And the use of gray as well as the use of color is really, really well done in this. The story itself is about a little girl who sort of has a portal world that she goes about, and she's telling her mom about this. But it has some really moving underlying themes. It's such a short read, and I was in tears by the end of it. I immediately handed it to Sush so that he could read it, and he was in tears by the end of it as well. So I think that this is such a great example of how powerful picture books can be, even in such a short space with such little writing. It's just really well done. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely recommend it. Then I DNF'd a book, which was Blackfish City by Sam J. Miller. This is a book that I've owned physically for quite a few years. Sush and I got it at an event a couple of years ago, and so I've been meaning to read it. And a Goodreads friend, Leticia, and I were supposed to buddy read this, but I started it, and at 11%, I DNF'd it. So I am very glad that I tried this book because it was an owned physical book, but it just wasn't for me. This is kind of an interesting one in terms of political commentary. It is set in some future world where kind of ecological changes are pretty extreme, and people live on these floating cities in the Arctic, I think. And there's a lot of major issues in terms of poverty and class distinctions, and there's also quite a lot of issues of illness and things like that. And that's about as far as I got, because the writing style in this just wasn't my style. It has that kind of cyberpunk noir feel, and that just really doesn't work for me. And I found that there was also a lot of info dumping right at the beginning, and that's another thing that I'm not a huge fan of. So I was really just not getting into this story. I wasn't liking it, even though I think that the political commentary in this, and the talking about ecological change, and the talking about the marginalized people who are affected, I think that would really work for me, but just that cyberpunk noir feel, I really struggle with. So I did DNF this, but I'm not at all trying to say other people shouldn't read this. It's just that that's not my kind of story that I like to read. But I am glad that I tried it, because now I will unhaul the book. And then lastly, I did pause one book, which was Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. This is a multi-generational historical fiction that I've heard the best reviews of. Everybody absolutely loves this book. And it is something that is really talking about the slave trade and talking about a lot of issues related to that, focusing on Ghana and people who are descended from Ghana. So this is a book that I was really looking forward to. I've had hold on it forever as well. and I picked it up and I was just not into it. This is something where it was kind of heavy and I was not in the mood for heavy, and it's something where I just started to realize that I have truly entered a reading slump. So I thought, rather than DNFing it or anything like that, I bet I would like this at another point. Let me just pause it, and I will come back to this at some point when I am more interested in reading it. So it's paused at 10%. Some point when I'm more in the mood, I will come back and finish this, because I don't think it's that this book is at fault. I think it's just my reading mood. So those are all of the books that I read, DNF'd, and paused this week. And now I want to talk a little bit about my reading mood, because I'm finding that I am entering a reading slump. And for me, the best thing to do when I enter a reading slump is to just kind of let myself go with it, and not push too hard. So often with my reading, I like to challenge myself. I like to try new things. I like to read kind of broadly. I like to have monthly priorities. But when I enter a reading slump, it's sort of not the time to challenge myself. I need to pull back, and if I want to read, probably do more mood reading, comfort reading, that sort of thing. So I have decided to not feel too bad that my August monthly priority didn't work out so well. I did read the 2 books this week that were by Nigerian authors, so that's great, but everything else that I tried, I just DNF'd, and I don't even think I have anything to talk about in a wrap-up, because it's just the 2 books that I read this week. So I'm not going to do a wrap-up for my August monthly priority, and I'm not going to do a September monthly priority. I was planning to do kind of Latinx heritage, but I just don't think that I want to do it as a monthly priority. I already have some books that are on like my radar that I've checked out, that I've holds on at the library, or even that I have bought that I want to read. So I might read some of those in September, but I want it to be a mood reading type of thing rather than an official TBR where I feel pressure. Also, I do technically have a couple of books that I have been scheduled to read in September, such as my Space Opera September TBR, so I'll link that below. And I have a couple of buddy reads planned. So for me, that's more than enough structure for September. And other than that, I just want to allow myself to pick up whatever I want to read, or to just not read if I'm not feeling like it. It's also kind of perfect for me to maybe read some extra SFF, which is great comfort reading for me, or even romance or middle grade, one of those things where I just find joy in it, and it's a comfort to me rather than a challenge. So that's kind of where I am. Also, in terms of my videos, I might not have like a second or third video each week like I often do. It might just be my weekly wrap-up some weeks. We'll see. I'm just gonna do what I feel like doing and not push for too much more, and just go with the flow as I'm feeling slumpy. So that is my plan for the next month or so. I hope that your reading is going a little bit more to plan, and that you're just loving what you're reading. I'm hoping that focusing on mood reading in September is gonna kind of pick me back up and have a lot of fun. If you guys have read any of the books that I've read this week, if you have any thoughts, anything you want to share, just leave me a comment down below.